romantic relationship. There's no such thing. The only unconditional love we have is to our children or our pets. I don't want to compare the two, but because no matter what our children do, we continue to love them. But in a relationship, are we obligated to love a partner that, say, treats us badly, abuses us? Of course not. So love does have conditions. It certainly does. The problem with the concept of love is that we have this expectation that love needs to be pure and perfect. But is there such a thing as pure love and perfect love? Are we perfect? Are we completely pure and perfect? It doesn't exist. It's an ideal that unfortunately gets sold to us by everything our culture tries to impose on us. Everything we see, whether it's movies or TV shows, or this is what we're told, that love is something that is perfect and should be perfect, and it is the answer to all our problems. Love will solve everything. If only we find our partner, our soulmate, that will cure everything. How many people were read, fairy tales growing up? Cinderella and Snow White, and every single fairy tale has what at the end? A prince that comes and sweeps away the princess and makes her life all better because it was crappy before, right? This is what we grow up on. From the age of nothing, we start to hear these stories. It is our culture that feeds us this ideal, and it urges us to find it ourselves, that we must seek this out. But that ideal doesn't exist. There is no perfect individual out there for us. And we cannot expect that a person should fill the void to make us whole. We need to be whole first. It's not about, filling a part of us. A big part of us is missing when we find the person that we end up with, that they fill that hole and make us whole. Unfortunately, this is something that is it's part of our culture, our upbringing. The other thing is that we tend to see love as a feeling. Love is not a feeling. I mean, it's partly a feeling, of course, but love is a verb. Love is action, full of actions. I cannot tell you I love you and then keep hitting you. What am I going to believe? That you love me because you tell me you love me, or your actions against me or towards me? That tells me that I am loved or not. Same with children, same with romantic partners. That's how it works. Love is also not the solution to fix everything. It doesn't fix our problems. It just doesn't work magic. It's not a magic solution to anything. And many of us think that once we find love, something magical will happen and all our problems will disappear. But we make love magical. We make it magical. Therefore, it is an action. These are actions that we take. The other thing, too, is that love evolves. Love is not a stagnant thing. It evolves over time. One of the things I hear people say, and maybe you've heard this too, that somebody says, "Well, I love you, but I'm not in love with you." Have you ever heard that? I love you, but I'm not in love with you. It's probably my worst pet peeve. I hate to hear those words because I don't understand it. What do you mean? You love me or you don't love me? But the in-love stage is only at the beginning of a relationship. And science has looked at this, how long that lasts. That in-love stage doesn't last more than 18 months. And people keep trying to go back to that. I want to feel like I did in the beginning. I want to feel like I did in the beginning. But is it possible to go back to the beginning? It's not possible, because love changes, and we have to accept that love changes and it deepens. Now, what's intimacy? Intimacy, we're not talking about sexuality here, because often when people hear the word intimacy, that's what they think about. We're talking about connection, connectedness, right? I like to break it down like this into 4 words. Intimacy, think of it as into me, see. Look into me. Actually, it's 3 words, right? Into me, see. You allow your partner to see your strengths. You allow your partner to see your weaknesses. You allow them to get into your emotional life. Now, in the words of somebody that I really like, who wrote the book Kosher Sex, Rabbi Boteach, he calls it emotional nakedness. Being able to be that vulnerable. It's really another word for vulnerability. That's what intimacy is all about. That's the most important thing. And to sustain a relationship, just getting married isn't enough. It's like planting a seed. You plant a seed, if you want it to grow properly and blossom and keep growing, it might pop up and grow for a bit, but if you stop watering it, nothing will happen. It will not grow. So this is a marriage is something you have to tend to. You cannot ignore it. You must tend to it every single day. And part of the problem is that we get very complacent in relationships. We get lazy. We think, well, she's here, he's there, it's okay. Tomorrow is always tomorrow. And I don't have to tell my partner every day that I appreciate her or him. I don't have to do this or that. They're here anyway. That's not how it works. If you really want to sustain that connection, you have to make an effort to connect, because it's too easy to just walk side by side. The way I like to look at it is 2 people are connected by a tether. A tether is like a long leash. One end is there and the other end is here. You don't need to be handcuffed together. A tether is good enough. Every once in a while, though, you have to tug on it to remind your partner that, hey, I'm here. I have your back. You need me closer? Bring me in. You need your space? It's okay. I don't need to be handcuffed to you, but I do need to be tethered. And if I feel like you're no longer there, it's like the movie in outer space when they lost each other and they're floating away, and that all they needed was that tether to hold them together. So it's important to look at it in that way. The other thing that I believe couples need is a bit of mystery. They need a bit of difference. You can look at the work of Esther Perel. She wrote a book called Mating in Captivity. Very, very interesting take on relationships. But she talks a lot about the mystery that we need to have in a relationship. But how it's not about keeping secrets. It's not about having a secret life. Not that kind of mystery. But it is about having an independence. Having something that belongs to you. Whether it's your activities, your friends, something that is yours, that your partner is not involved with, so that there is something to talk about. You don't have to know every single thing about your partner. When they're out with their friends, you're not the fly on the wall who knows exactly what they're talking about, and that's okay. I think a lot of couples think that they have to become one whole, like one circle inside another circle. Then there is no difference. Except that the strongest couples are the couples that are interconnected, interlocked. When you're interlocked, you're very strong. But there's a part that is the couple, and then there's the part that is the individual. And those are actually the strongest couples. So I want you to think about that for a bit. I think it's important that we have to realize you don't have to lose the me when you become a we. What I'm seeing in my practice as a marriage counselor is you've heard of the 7-year itch? Well, there's now a 27-year itch. And marriages are breaking up after 27 years, 25 years, 20, 30 years together. What's happening? And you know who's initiating these divorces? Over 70% it's the women who are initiating these divorces. Why? They lose the me, right? They spend years raising their kids and devoting their life to other people and their husbands and all of that. And their kids grow up, they leave the nest, And they face themselves and they ask, who am I? Where's the me? I don't know where me is. And then they start evaluating their own lives and their marriages and etc. And so I do see a lot of couples now who have been married for a very long time who get into that particular situation. So we have to, we want to avoid that. But there's a lot of things we need to do in order to do that. So one of the things I was asked to talk about was communication. Communication is obviously the cornerstone of any healthy marriage. I mean, trust it's a given. You have to have trust. But communication is the other big part. Would you agree that as human beings, we don't read minds? Right? Except how come we hear things like, he should know what I want. He should know what it is to be romantic. She should know. And the reality is, no. I hear things like, if he loved me, he would know what I'm feeling, or he would know what I need. Except we're not good at reading minds. And guess what? It's not that I want to rag on men, but men are notoriously bad at it. Women are better at it because we're trained to do that. We're trained to be very compassionate, empathic from a very young age. Men, they don't have that. And it's not fair to expect our partners to read our minds and to know what we want. We don't come with a manual, an owner's manual, but we have one. We each have one. We should be handing that over to our partner. This is what I need. This is what is in my mind. My idea of romance is this, or whatever it is. But don't expect to read your partner's mind. Really important. The other thing that's really, I know men will relate to this and women will too. When women talk, they talk because they just need to talk. What do men do when they hear women talk, their woman talk? They try to fix it, right? They try to find the solution for it. But all women want, for the most part, is, I just want to be heard. Just listen to me. You don't have to tell me what to do. And I often challenge the men in my practice, and I tell them, okay, from now on, you're going to have to just hear her and only tell her what to do or give her your opinion when she asks you, when she says, honey, what do you think I should do? If she doesn't ask what you think you should do, don't tell her what to do. It's actually quite patronizing when you think about it. If I have a fight with my boss and I come home and I tell my husband, my boss was really mean and I don't know what I'm going to do, and my husband might say, you know what you're going to do? Tomorrow you're going to march into his office and you're going to tell him exactly where, and that's what the reaction I'm like, I didn't ask him. I know what I need to do. I'm a big girl. I'm an intelligent girl. I can handle my boss. You don't need to tell me how to do it. So it starts to feel very patronizing. So imagine somebody who does this over time a lot. Men tend to, the way they communicate is, it's more direct. It's more brief, right? Women, on the other hand, tend to need more detail, to talk in more detail. And men tend to be more could you get to the point? Like, what's the bottom line? They don't want to say it, but you see it in their eyes. They glass over. All of a sudden, you're like, excuse me, did you hear what I said? Well, maybe they can't. Like, there's a limited number of minutes that they can hear without losing it somewhere, okay? Losing their focus. I think it's important that we understand these differences. And men will get impatient with that venting process, right? It's like, she needs to just talk, and he's like, okay, can we just figure this out? Like, why are you venting? What's going on? Women tend to share in detail, great detail, but they do this, they share their thoughts, they share their feelings. It's their way to connect. This is part intimacy for them. This is what defines intimacy for them. They're more likely to encourage their partner to speak, even others that they speak to. They tend to apologize more, they ask questions more. They're more engaging, whereas he's more authoritative in terms of that discussion that happens. So it's not everything I can tell you about communication. There's so much more, but in the few minutes I have here. The other thing I want to talk about, do I have time? I have a bit more time. Have you ever noticed that we recreate our parents' relationship? Have you ever said to yourself, oh my goodness, I'm just like my mother, or I'm just like my father, or your partner says, you're just like your mother, or you're just like your father, which is usually an insult, right? Right. But this is interesting because in what the psychological research shows is that we do repeat patterns. We do. And generally speaking, we do repeat our parents' marriages. And there's good reasons for this, but the most extreme examples are usually the very dysfunctional examples, right? So if you grow up with an alcoholic father, as a woman, you're very likely to marry an alcoholic. If your father was abusive or your mother was abusive, you will end up, generally speaking, in that same type of situation. It's what we're used to. It is our norm. It's something, if we grow up in chaos, when we find ourselves in a chaotic relationship, there's nothing new. It's like, oh, I can handle this. I've done this before. So it's very natural. But if you grow up in a home that's more functional, that's what you're looking for. You seek out what you are most used to. So it doesn't mean that we are doomed. It doesn't mean that you're stuck to repeat those patterns forever and ever. But if you don't consciously take stock of that, if you're not mindful of what you want to change, what you want to do differently than your parents, and no parent is perfect, then you have to really be mindful of it and make efforts to do something different. It's like cross-country skiing. If you go cross-country skiing, you always look for the trail that has a well-grooved path. You end up on that path naturally, right? There's no other way. But if you want to do something different, you actually have to step off that track and go on and make your own track. And it's harder snow to go through. But this is the effort required to be able to do that. And we must remember that we teach our children our values, but how do we do that? We don't tell them our values. We show them our values. They watch us. So they learn from us how to be mothers, women, men, fathers. They learn from us by watching us from a very young age. It's a bit of a blueprint that happens from from the time they're born, really, and they observe and they absorb. They observe and they absorb. So you can tell them, it's very bad to smoke as you're smoking, but yes, okay, they know it's very bad to, but their observation is you smoke. So therefore, for them, that's a natural kind of thing that they absorb. It's part of their blueprint. So when they start, oh well, it's a normal thing. So it's important awareness is really important. The last thing I want to talk about is the elements of communication that I believe every couple needs. Compassion. Compassion is the most important element in any marriage. Thinking about what another person is feeling. When a person talks, really trying to find out what's in their mind. What's happening here? Not always looking at the surface of what they're telling you, but looking at what's underneath. What are they really saying? She's angry with me. What's really going on under there? Or she's irritable. What's happening here? Is it about me? Is it something that she might be going through? Which brings me to the second point, which is don't expect malintent. Don't assume malintent. Your partner doesn't mean to hurt you. So if you assume that they're there to hurt you, of course, there's always going to be misunderstandings and what have you. It's a little bit like the example I like to use is if I walk by and step on your toe, your toe's going to hurt. If I stop by and stomp on your toe, purposely, your toe's going to hurt. Same hurt. But are you going to get mad at me if I did it by accident? So why do we assume that our partners are hurting us on purpose? So don't assume malintent. Of course, this doesn't work in abusive relationships, but in everyday relationships, you should be able to recognize when you're in an abusive relationship, but we don't have time to go into that. And the third element is we have to accept our differences. Everybody has a different language of love. We can't expect our partner to be loving in the way we're loving. We all have our way of doing it, but it is up to us to find out from our partner, well, how do you show your love? Maybe I show my love by making lunches for my husband every day. Maybe that's how I show my love. But he's saying, no, you're not affectionate to me, so therefore you don't love me. But my way of showing love is different than your way of showing love, where does that come from? The blueprint, where we grew up. For some of us, we can grow up in affectionate homes that it just seems natural and normal, and others will never have witnessed it. So this is what they assume is the norm, and it doesn't come naturally. But because something doesn't come naturally doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. Another thing is about conflict resolution. When we fight, we cannot argue to win. It's not about not fighting. If a couple tells me they never fight, I worry about that, because it means one person is always backing down. So that bothers me. But to be able to resolve conflict, you cannot be in it to win. If you're in it to win, everybody loses. It's not about competition, it's about cooperation. That's the important thing. We have to seek to understand the other person's point of view. It's called empathic listening. That's the highest level of communication you can have, is empathic listening. Trying to feel what your partner is feeling. Really trying to understand. So this is where you have to look beyond the words. The problem when we fight, what happens? I'm, complaining about something, and my partner is preparing their rebuttal. They're not actually listening. They're thinking, what's my argument going to be next, right? So obviously that isn't the way to do it. Now I think I'm running out of time. The last thing I want to share with you is just a quote that I really love. It is quite clear that between love and understanding, there is a very close link. He who loves understands, and he who understands loves. One who feels understood feels loved, and one who feels loved feels sure of being understood. That's from a book called To Understand Each Other, which of course is the most important thing, because it's all these misunderstandings that cause rifts and resentments build over time, and when there's enough resentment, it causes contempt, and when you have contempt for your partner, it's very hard to get any love back. So if you feel that you can't get past a certain point with your partner and you feel contempt, I really encourage people to seek out help. There are marriage counselors all over the city that can help, good marriage counselors, and it is effective. Don't wait until you're at when there's way too much water under the bridge, and then it's very hard to get back the good feelings. So that's the last message I have. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much. I can see why you've lasted 17 years. Sharp, to the point, no pop psychology. Thank you very much. By the way, this thing about turning out to be like your mother, I saw this mirror in a furniture store. They were selling this mirror. On the frame was written, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, I am my mother after all."
I'm pretty happy to be my mother, actually. If I'm anywhere near like my mother is, I'm happy.
Also, before we start, what exactly is a spiritualist? Is a spiritualist like a psychic? Like people who can move things with their mind? I heard that there was a convention of spiritualists, and the first guy got up to speak, and he tapped on the microphone, and he said, "Can you hear me in the back? If you can hear me, raise my arm." I just want to agree with everything Dr. Laurie said, but in a Torah context. We know that there are three primary emotions: chesed, gvura, tiferes. Love, fear, and compassion. In every relationship, in every marriage, there needs to be love, fear, and compassion. You have to love your wife. You have to be terrified of her. And you have to have compassion for her. By the way, the same thing is true with your fellow Jew. You have a mitzvah to love your fellow Jew. Every love is accompanied with fear. You also have to fear every Jew. And you have to have compassion. So the way it works is like this. And again, I'm just repeating what the doctor already said. The love is the pursuit of closeness. Chesed, kindness. Kindness means to be generous and giving. Without that, no relationship even gets off the ground. But in addition to that kindness, there also has to be a certain fear, which means a certain discretion where you allow your spouse their privacy and their space and their individuality. Rabbeinu Gershom, 1,000 years ago, found it necessary to create a ban that prohibits husbands and wives from reading each other's mail, because it's an invasion of privacy. So when you're living with somebody, the need for respect and dignity is much greater than with anyone else in your life. So if you're going to be respectful to the stranger, if you're going to be courteous and modest in the presence of a stranger, you certainly should be courteous and modest and respectful to the person you have to live with for another 80 years. So the second emotion is fear. The fear of overstepping your borders, of intruding or trespassing on your spouse's borders, which would include that if the spouse has a sensitive area, a subject that they really can't talk about or are very uncomfortable, don't impose yourself. Don't try to tear away the mask. Respect it. Honor it. Defend it. That's what you're there for. If the spouse wants to take off the mask and get past their sensitivity, for this they need a professional, a counselor, or something, not the spouse's job. The spouse's job is to remain loyal and protect. Here's a very quick example. Couple is sitting in a restaurant, and he's something of a klutz, and he reaches up to get something on the table, and he spills the soup over himself and over the rest of the table. And the wife turns to a total stranger at the next table and says, "Can you believe this?" Or, "He does this all the time." Or, worse, "What am I going to do with him?" So what has happened here, just when this poor Shlemazel needs your support, you turn against him. And all of a sudden, this total stranger at the next table is your bosom pal, and the two of you are going to analyze this poor guy who has hot soup all over his pants. That's a lack of respect. It's also a lack of fidelity. It's an infidelity. Just when he needs you the most, you step out of the relationship as if he's the stranger. Or the same thing in reverse. A couple come to the cash register after shopping and filling up their cart, and the wife is digging in her wallet for the credit card, and she can't find it. And the husband turns to the cashier and says, "She does this to me all the time." That's such an infidelity. Or when the couple come home, either to her parents or to his parents. All the way there, they're driving for a long time, they're happily married, they love each other, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. As soon as they step into the house, Let's say it's her parents' house. She's home. She's comfortable. He is welcome. And he feels that. Like all of a sudden he's the stranger, even to his wife. So that lack of respect, or that lack of fear, is destructive to the relationship. Also, like Dr. Laurie mentioned, if you lower your standards, if you think that once you're in love, you can be your ugliest, sloppiest, worst self, and it's not going to do any harm, that's silly. Of course it's going to do harm. So the modesty between husband and wife has to be greater than the modesty in the streets. And we have that really backwards. You hear parents saying to their teenage daughters, "You can't go out dressed like that." Is all you're worried about what happens out there? And at home it's okay to run around immodestly? The home is where you have your center. The home is your nest. The home is where the holiness is supposed to be. That's where you should really be concerned. So that's the fear. Then there's the compassion. You have to have compassion for your spouse. Not because your spouse has their own problems, but because you are their problem. So the compassion is, I feel so bad for my wife that she has to put up with me. That's good compassion because it throws in a little humility also. And by the way, if marriage doesn't produce humility, it's not even a marriage. If you're not humbled in your marriage, you're missing something. Something's wrong. And it may very well be that the main purpose for marriage is to make us humble. Somebody once asked me about the difference between Jews and Christians. Christians want their clergy to be celibate. Jews want their rabbis to have many children. Why? How did we get so divided on this subject? So off the cuff I said, well, everybody wants their clergy to have some virtues. Christians chose the virtue of celibacy. Jews chose the virtue of humility. The bigger your family, the more humble you become. You get married, you are practicing humility. And the way it expresses itself is that you really feel compassionate. You understand how difficult it is to live with you. And that, more than anything else, eliminates arguments. Because if you know already it's hard to live with me, most arguments are avoided right there. But there's a fourth leg on which a marriage stands, without which it's a good relationship, it's just not a marriage. So if you have the love and you have the fear and you have the compassion, you have a very nice relationship. And like the fairy tale said, you can live happily ever after. But I'm not sure you're married. The magic of marriage is that it introduces an element of sanctity. Right? I'm the spiritualist. Right? So the spiritual element is the holiness with which we treat the marriage. Because marriage, I hate to tell you, marriage is not a good idea. And it's not a human idea. Because men and women basically are not meant for each other. And they do not get along. You've noticed? Men and women with each other, it's terrible. And it always has been. We thought we could make it better by having this whole social experiment with co-education. We get comfortable with each other. We understand each other. We come to understand the opposite sex. It's terrible. When you start to understand the opposite sex, you are so confused. Never try to understand the opposite. Just understand yourself. That would be a great accomplishment. But when we introduce boys to girls and girls to boys, it's a mess. That's why God created marriage. Marriage is where the man becomes a husband and the woman becomes a wife. Everything changes. Men and women are better off without each other. Husband and wife cannot exist without each other. Now, nobody in their right mind wants to become a wife. Because wives, there's no glamour. When married women get together to spend the night out, what do they call it? A girls' night out. Because they want to have fun. If it's a wives' night out, they're just going to be desperate. And even if it's a women's night out, not enough fun. They got to go back to being girls to have some fun. So wives have no glamour. Wives have no respect. Husbands, forget about it. Nobody respects husbands. They're the biggest losers and wimps. Remember that commercial where the husband gets up in the middle of the night and he can't sleep and he's just so helpless and he wakes up his wife. He wakes her up. Why? Because he's suffering from post-nasal drip. Remember that commercial? She gets out of bed to get him his medicine. You don't want to be a husband. Not after that commercial. So part of the disaster in marriages today is that a man and a woman marry each other. She remains a woman. He remains a man. And they think they can get along. But they can't. You've got to become husband and wife. To become husband and wife, you both have to surrender. It's an important word. And it's a necessary human experience. If we can't surrender, then we can't really become one. If you can picture 2 drops of water right next to each other, what keeps them separate? Why isn't it one big drop? Why are they 2 separate drops? So science tells us there's a certain surface tension that gives each drop its shape. But if you touch it and break that tension, they will flow into each other and they will become one drop. The ability to lose that tension is surrender. To get past myself, I don't have to have it my way. Like Dr. Laurie said, if you want to be right, join a debate team. I remember during one marriage counseling session, the wife finally, after years of arguing, finally said to her husband, do you want to be right or do you want to be married? Make up your mind. Because you can't have both. Like that famous joke. If a husband disagrees with his wife but nobody hears it, is he still wrong? Well, this woman says, all my life I searched for Mr. Right. And I finally found him. Nobody told me his first name was Always. It's impossible to live with somebody who needs to be right. And how do you get past that? You break the surface tension that keeps you separate from the other, and that's surrendering. Surrender is such an important and positive experience. In order to become one, husband and wife have to surrender, but not to each other. That's degrading. They surrender together into something bigger than themselves, something bigger than the two of us, and that's marriage. Marriage is a holy institution. Only God could come up with a plan like that. And when we treat it with holiness, when we realize that we're doing something greater and bigger than both of us, then we can surrender to it, to the marriage itself, to the oneness. And then we have a bond that is literally unbreakable. I learned this when I was a teenager. I was talking to one of my favorite rabbis, a brilliant man who thoughtful and eloquent, and it was a pleasure to talk to him. So we're standing and talking. I was 17. We're talking on the streets in Brooklyn, and a young couple approach him. He's the rabbi in the community. And the wife says to him, "Rabbi, isn't it true you're not allowed to ladle soup out of a pot on Shabbos? Tell my husband. He doesn't know." The rabbi said, whoa, slow down. What's the question again? She says, "Are you allowed to ladle soup out of a pot on Shabbos?" He says, "You mean with a ladle?" She says, "Yeah." Is out of a soup pot? She says, "Yeah." While it's on the fire? She says, "Yeah." "You mean on Shabbos?" She says, "Yes." He says, "Boy, that's complicated. I'll go home, I'll look it up, call me later, and I'll give you the answer." So they walk away. I'm looking at him like, am I missing something here? Every kid in the Cheder knows you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. If you ladle soup out of a pot, you're stirring the pot. Stirring is cooking. Everybody knows you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So you have to take the pot off the fire if you're going to take some soup out of it. So I said to him, "What am I missing here? She's right. Why didn't you just tell her that she was right?" And he said, "And make a husband look bad to his own wife? You're not allowed to do that." That blew me away. He did it so naturally, so fluidly, as if this was the most normal thing in the world, to make himself look really slow. Politically correct, right? I was going to say dumb, but that's offensive. In order to not dampen the respect or the admiration or the good feelings that a husband and wife have. So when you're talking to a husband and wife, you're talking to a married couple, you're talking to a holy institution. Don't make the husband look bad. Don't make the wife look foolish. On the contrary, whatever you can do to enhance their feelings towards each other, that's the mitzvah. So the spiritual side of the whole thing is that marriage is bigger than life. When we treat it with sanctity, we have all the laws of when a couple can be intimate, when they shouldn't be intimate, how they should be intimate. We need all that because instinctively we would do everything wrong. Because it takes holiness to make a good marriage. So where do we learn holiness? Obviously, from God, from the Torah, from Jewish law, that has perfected this art over 4,000 years, so that we can actually be bigger than ourselves, lose our surface tension, and actually flow into each other and become something bigger than each of us alone would be, and even bigger than the two of us together. Something really holy. And that's how you make healthy children, holy children. That's why God is so obsessed with intimacy, because he has a little obsession with babies. He loves babies, and he wants to make sure that they are welcomed into this world properly. So if you want to know how sacred a relationship should be, the Rebbe of Kutsk was a very holy man, and people thought he was a little, his head in the clouds. He wasn't really paying attention to real life. He wasn't down to earth. But they noticed that he is very insightful when it comes to describing his chassidim. He really knew them well. And they were discussing that, and somebody said, how well do you know your son? And I'll end with this powerful answer. He says, how well do I know my son? I know with which thoughts I invited him into this world. That's called bonding. That's the sanctity of a relationship. Now let's move on to the fun part.
Why are you looking at me? We can pass the basket around, maybe see if anybody has other questions.
Right. Well, you can ask a question out loud too, I think, right?
Sure.
I've been in a 16-year marriage, and the intimacy spark is gone. Even though my husband and I are great friends, how do we rekindle the spark? Dr. Laurie, and then.
Try to keep it very clean. You could do that talk. I was warned. Well, first of all, it's a little bit of what I said earlier about you have to put effort into it. And, you know, long-term relationships are not easy to sustain. First, you have to have realistic expectations for the marriage and for the relationship. And understand that it's not about trying to get to where you first started, but more about trying to get to maybe a new place. And it's a little bit like the beginning of a relationship is like a raging fire. 16 years into a relationship, the same fire is there, except now there's only the embers in the fireplace. So when you have embers in a fireplace, you need a little bit of action to get some sparks. So you have to put in effort to do it. And there's many things that you can do, but spending time together is the most important thing. People forget, but if you want to build intimacy, you better have some time. So date nights, planning, a lot of, I often tell people we get very complacent, even in the bedroom, so planning your sexual activity is a good idea. People think it has to be spontaneous. It need not be. I don't think the best way is really to plan it if you want to have it on a regular basis. So you have to be able to think about this stuff and make conscious efforts to do it, because it doesn't come as naturally as it once did.
I was talking about the laws of mikveh in a class, and it turns out that if you follow the laws of mikveh, you are intimate for 2 weeks out of the month, and you're not intimate for the other 2 weeks. And this one woman was very upset. She said, that's half your life. 2 weeks without intimacy? This is ridiculous. Anyway, afterwards we were talking privately, and I said, so how often do you get to be intimate? She says, well, we both work. There's very little time, and we're tired. Once a month if we're lucky. I said, that is terrible. And that's voluntary. That's terrible. We don't, we think we're an over-sexed society. We're actually not.
You're right.
It's tragic that we don't have intimacy as often as we should. But I think that what happens naturally is that familiarity breeds contempt. Sex is boring by its very nature. That's why we always need to embellish it You have to add a little danger, a little risk, a little adventure, because it's just boring. Even teenagers today, if they're in an honest mood, will tell you that they've had it. They just don't care anymore. But it's not cool to admit that, so they play the game. But really, they've had it. They're jaded. They're not interested anymore. They're looking for alternatives. To regain the intimacy, we have to stop treating it like soup. You know the Jackie Mason joke? Every movie has to have a sex scene. Why? So the producers say, because, the movies are depicting real life, and in real life, people have sex. And he says, yeah, but they also have soup. In fact, more people have soup than sex.
That's right.
Because nobody ever said, soup? No, I have a headache. So really, what is the difference between soup and sex? There really is none anymore. Sex has become soup. And if you had enough soup already, that's it, enough.
Just have to put more spices in the soup.
Exactly. You have to change it into something not
Change
quite
the
like
recipe,
soup.
right?
Super soup. Something like that. The answer is, don't be surprised. That's the nature of human sexuality. It's an adventure at first, and then it becomes boring. What we need to have in our marriages is true intimacy. And they are not the same thing.
No.
Sex is personal and keeps people apart. Whereas intimacy brings people together in a bond that is unbreakable. Just for example, I'm allowed to be graphic.
Please.
You don't mind?
I'm very happy you are. That it's you, not me.
You're not going to blush?
You get in trouble. Yeah.
After a couple have been physical, and the husband says, so how was it? Is that not offensive? How was it? Who's the it? It was just us. And what do you mean, how was it? Weren't you there? Obviously not. You were someplace else. But that's the nature of pleasure, of sexuality. Everyone experiences their own pleasure, which makes you very busy and conscious of yourself. And then it becomes a performance, and then it becomes an anxiety, and then Viagra makes a lot of money, which is tragic. So what we need to do is go back to practicing intimacy. Intimacy means we want to be together. It's not a performance. It's not a pursuit of pleasure, and it's not even an act of love. Calling it making love is vulgar. It's much more important than love. It's what Golda said to Tevye. I am yours for 25 years. If that's not love, then what is? A poem? A Hallmark card? What's love if not giving myself to you? So if we give ourselves rather than something, that creates intimacy. In the bedroom, there are no things. There's just us, just them. If you eliminate all things, it's not about love, and it's not about pleasure, and it's not about proving a point, and it's not about showing off. It's just the pleasure of having each other. That doesn't get old. Things get old. You've been there, you've done that. That's it, it's over. But if it's each other, taking away all the tension, removing all the things that keep us separate, that kind of bonding just gets richer with time. So take a break from the secular concept of what goes on in the bedroom and replace it with true intimacy. There's a lot to talk about, but just to give you the difference, after sex, you feel a little diminished, even if it's husband and wife. You're a little diminished. You've lost a little respect for yourself and a little respect for the other. That's the nature of it. Intimacy, on the other hand, takes you to your most innocent place. You are most innocent when you surrender yourself to each other, because you've gotten past all things. So that after being intimate, you feel more innocent than before. Huge difference. And the benefits to the children born from intimacy is indescribable. So if the sex is no good, that's inevitable. Switch to intimacy. That's always good.
Very well said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
This question may tie into what the two of you just discussed, but I'll read it anyway, although I may mispronounce one of these words. I don't know if this is too graphic a question, but here goes. What is your advice for a couple in which one suffers from vaginismus?
Vaginismus.
Okay.
You want me to explain what that is first?
Perhaps. And the other is the survival of childhood sex abuse. That's the
Right.
couple.
So a couple where one experiences painful, we'll call it painful intercourse, or the inability to have full intercourse, and somebody who has had sexual assault in the past will obviously create difficulty in that respect. But it doesn't have to affect the intimacy part, the being together part. I have seen couples where they have not been able to engage in intercourse and have had wonderful sex lives or wonderful intimate sex lives together, and the only reason they come to see me is because they want to make babies, and so they want to do the functional part of it. So it's really about creating a space where it's not just about the sex act, but more about what it represents. And there's many ways to be sexual. It doesn't, and just to also add, vaginismus can be cured. So if somebody experiences that, I urge them to seek professional help with a sexologist and a specialist. It's 100% curable. So I don't want people to live with that. And anyone who's had sexual assault in their past can also certainly be helped through the healing process. So this does not condemn you to not having an intimate life.
To add the spiritualist element, first of all, knowing that there's a difference between sex and intimacy would probably be helpful, because the bad experience was sexual. What you're having in your marriage is intimacy. So don't confuse the two. Don't expect the same result. It's a completely different experience. And that's probably how those people who were severely abused do go on to have healthy lives, because they make this distinction. What happened that is negative, that's sexual. Now we're going to be intimate. So don't confuse the two. Also, if you're religious and you were raised all your life as a single to think that sex is dirty, it's disgusting, it's horrible, you're not supposed to look, you're not supposed to think, you're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to... And then all of a sudden you get married, and now all that horrible, disgusting, animalistic, filthy stuff is okay. Something doesn't compute.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's like, with anybody else this would be horrible, but with my own spouse I can be an animal and I can do disgusting things. This is really confusing. That's also why the expression making love, why are you calling it making love? Because what are you going to say? I'm having sex? That's disgusting. So you pretty it up by saying, no, this is love. Oh, well. But I never understood that either. If you're going to do something disgusting, don't do it with somebody you love. There's total confusion going on here. So, how do we get past this contradiction? It really isn't a contradiction. What we were told is disgusting, animalistic, selfish, greedy, vulgar, is and always will be. Because that's the nature of sex. When you get married, you're having intimacy. No one ever said that was disgusting. No one ever said that's selfish, greedy, and animalistic. On the contrary, intimacy is the holiest thing two human beings can produce, short of doing the mitzvah. Without doing a mitzvah, husband and wife being together produces holiness. Nobody ever said that was nasty. So don't compare the two. Also, a little faith would go a long way. Every tragedy a person experiences, sexual or otherwise, there's a divine plan. God runs the world. There's some mysterious, hidden reason that you experience this. And when you do experience it, God gives you the ability to turn it into something positive. So no despair, no walking around thinking everybody is an animal and everything is dangerous and life is a jungle. It's not. So if we focus on what God wants and that God runs the world, a little trust in God helps, not only on the dollar bill, but in life.
How do I respond when my wife objects to intimacy and asks to reschedule? How do I accept this rejection? Dr. Laurie.
That's a very complicated situation. It really talks about, to me anyway, about sexual desire and our expectations and the difference between male and female sexual desire. If we're just going to talk about it at that level, I think it's important that she doesn't have that, I'm assuming, that feeling, that spontaneous urge for sex that is often there early in a relationship, that men don't tend to lose. Men tend to maintain a spontaneous urge for sex. Women, though, are more, instead of being spontaneous, they're more responsive. So what that means is that they actually have to make a decision, a choice to be intimate. It's not driven by something else. It has to be driven by her wanting to be close to her partner, her wanting to connect to her partner. But she won't be able to do that if she's resentful, if they've had a fight in the morning and she doesn't feel it's been resolved. Women need, what I often say is, women need warmth in their hearts for their partners to be able to make the decision and the choice to be sexual. And once they begin and their stimulation is involved and they start to be involved, then the desire suddenly kicks in and they want to continue, and it's wonderful and they feel good and they feel connected, and then they usually say, wow, this was wonderful, we really should do this more often, and the whole cycle starts all over again. But if you just count on, well, I really don't feel like it because there's no spontaneous feeling to do it, then, or how about tomorrow? Well, there's going to be many, many, many tomorrows, and it could extend to months, years of no activity. So it's important that women understand that this is how it works for them, and to be able to make the choice, because sexuality with intimacy is the best kind of sexuality there is. It holds couples together when they abandon themselves to that, when they are vulnerable, and so people need to understand that it's good for us. It's good for us.
It might sound like I'm just repeating myself, but I'm going to repeat myself. If the activity is in your mind if it's a thing to do or not to do, you will very often choose not to do it for all sorts of reasons which the doctor can tell you better than me. It, I'm not in the mood for it. I can't do it. I'm not so good at it. It doesn't fit in my schedule right now, so we will reschedule it. Why does it feel like a personal rejection? Right, that was part of the question. He doesn't want to do it. Why are you feeling rejected? Or she doesn't want to do it. She's not in the mood for it. Don't take it personal. Like the guy who said, I'm getting divorced because I don't need this. And I was out of yeshiva and naive, and I had never heard that expression before. So I said, why are you divorcing her? Because you don't need this. Get rid of this. You had enough of this. Try a little of that. But why are you divorcing her? See, he was never married to her. It was always a thing, a this or a that. So if in your mind the intimacy is a thing, you're not always in the mood for this thing. And you could get bored with this thing. But if you treat it as a thing, you're literally creating a love triangle. There's you, there's your spouse, and there's this thing that you're not in the mood for, or you are in the mood, but this thing has got to go. There should be no thing between a husband and wife. It should just be them. Just us. You don't want to be us today? That's insulting. That is personally offensive. But if you don't want to do it, fine, don't do it. But don't leave me. So again, we are so saturated with this message in the media and Hollywood that there is this great thing that you can do together. There isn't. Ask your grandmother what goes on in the bedroom, and she'll tell you. Nothing.
Statistically, 1 in 4 couples are considered sexless. Yeah, 1 in 4.
But that's not what your grandmother meant. When she said nothing, she didn't mean don't do anything.
She's not telling you what she's doing.
What she meant was, when a husband and wife walk into the bedroom, they don't bring anything with them. It's just them, to the exclusion of all things, including sexual performance. Intimacy is a non-thing. That's why it's holy. A thing is like soup. You can buy it, you can have it, you can enjoy it, you can throw it out. And you can certainly have had enough soup. Intimacy is not a thing. It's two people. And people are not things. So the expression, marriage is a give and take, no, it's not. Taking is abusive. So here's the bumper sticker that this couple should put on their car, or maybe on their bed. Nothing you get from your spouse is as important as your spouse. Nothing you do with your spouse is as important as your spouse. Nothing about your spouse can be more important than your spouse. If we can get rid of these things, if we can get rid of all of these intrusions into our intimacy, into our privacy, intimacy does not grow old, and there's never an occasion where you just don't want each other unless you're angry, and then you shouldn't be intimate when you're angry at each other. So there should be no television in a bedroom, ever, ever, ever. Even if it's off, which is hardly ever. There should not be a television in the bedroom. There should not be a computer, a desk, homework, nothing.
A phone.
Grandma was right. When you walk into the bedroom, you leave all things behind. And it's just the two of you. And that's heavenly.
How do you respond to a friend who complains about her husband if it appears that he speaks to her or he is abusive? You don't want to say anything negative about a marriage, but you also feel bad for your friend and want to help.
Yeah, that's difficult. The only thing, if it was my friend, I'd encourage my friend to get professional help in a situation like that. To watch somebody tell you about their suffering in a marriage that is abusive, rather than tell them what they should do, is get them to come to a conclusion of what they need to do, and hopefully that couple can be seen professionally to be able to overcome that.
As a non-professional, the culture needs to be improved, not just this couple. The idea that husbands and wives can talk disrespectfully to each other, even painfully, abusively, where is this coming from? Where is this notion that we're married, so now I can say whatever I want to you? This is a cultural thing. And culturally, it should be unthinkable, unacceptable, and vile. This guy was telling me that when he gets angry at his wife, he loses control. And yes, he hit her. So I said, with a baseball bat? He said, don't be ridiculous. I said, oh, so you didn't really lose control. Because even when you were very angry, you would never think of hitting her with a bat. That's crazy. So you're not crazy. But you hit her to the degree that you gave yourself permission. Right? Hitting her with a bat, that's crazy. But hitting her with your hand, lost control. You didn't lose control, you gave yourself permission. Why is that right? Where does that come from? It's a culture. And the culture is nasty, by the way. You know, we're so politically correct, we would never say anything slightly offensive, but we'll do a lot of offensive things because we're not saying it. So politically correct is only in language, not in behavior. This is ridiculous. We have to change our culture, elevate our standards. And I think if women held a higher standard, men would rise. Because men will only be as good as they have to be. If they can get away with less, they'll get away with less. So if we raise the standard, and if it becomes unthinkable to talk down to your wife, I'm going to tell you a really beautiful thing. We were growing up in Brooklyn. Up to a certain age, we didn't know our mother's first name. Because, of course, we would never call her by her first name. But I never heard my father call her by her first name, because he would never call her. When he needed to speak to her, he went to where she was sitting or where she was, and he would talk to her. Calling your spouse from the other side of the house, it is so disrespectful. It should be forbidden. You want to talk, go to the other person. You don't summon your husband or your wife the way you would a dog. Come here, beg. Don't do that to your spouse. So a little more respect in general would make this misbehavior unthinkable. And it's got to be unthinkable.
Perhaps continuing that theme, this question comes. If parents are to model one thing to their children, what should that be? And which one thing is most damaging to model to them?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer in full, but what's damaging to them, when children, especially if you want them to have healthy relationships, when you don't model a healthy relationship, a loving relationship, a respectful relationship to them, then that is part of the culture of that creates a lot of that abuse, where people find themselves in abusive situations. So to me, it's really important to work hard to model a good, healthy relationship to your children. I don't know if it's the most important thing you want to give your kids. I don't think I could pick one thing, but maybe the spiritualist will be able to find the one thing. The one thing that you would say? Yes, sure, I have a show to do. You're right. Thank you.
I would actually
tonight.
I would actually want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Going beyond psychology, or maybe tomorrow's psychology, the assumption is that people are miserable, unhappy, depressed, whatever, because of an unsatisfied, unfulfilled need. And if we can dig deep and find what that need is and satisfy it, we would all be healthy. Is it possible that we're just not digging deep enough? Like Freud said,
Yes.
if you can satisfy your libido, and Adler said if you can satisfy your need for control, and Viktor Frankl said if you can find meaning, maybe there's something even deeper. If we went really deep inside of ourselves, we wouldn't discover a deeper need. We would find that we have no needs.
That's right. There's that it's a sense of that peace, fulfillment within the self. The problem with our culture is we look to the external to be fulfilled. More money, more things, another partner, a better partner, more sex, whatever that thing is, like you say, that's what we always look for, because we're cultured this way, we're taught this way, that it's outside of us. But if we teach, now there's a movement of mindfulness and things that, so it's about looking inside of oneself to find peace within and happiness within, and learning to just be. Because people are always looking to be something else or to find something else, but they forget to live now.
Okay. So what the Torah says is, I was not created other than to serve my Creator, which in psychological terms would mean I don't need to be created. So I certainly have no needs. If I wasn't born, if I wasn't created, I would be perfectly content. So all the needs I have are not really mine. They're imposed on me. I need to eat, I need security, I need love. No, I don't. Leave me alone. Don't create me, and I'll be happy. Or at least I won't complain. So why then do I exist? Because my Creator needs something. So I think that ultimately mental health and emotional health comes from getting past all of our needs and discovering what we are needed for. That's a very spiritual message.
Well said.
I've done my job.
Yes, you have. Thank you. A summary? Well, it's certainly on the show, right? Unfortunately, I do have to leave because I have to run to the radio station. But what a pleasure it is to be able to talk about love and intimacy with such an esteemed individual next to me, and talk, and just, you know, clearly we have very similar messages. Our message is the same, even we agree even on the sexuality stuff. So we agree more than we disagree, which is, it's just wonderful hearing the words differently. And I may steal a few of your phrases, so if you don't mind, in the talks that I give or on the radio, I'll spread the word. But this whole notion, and I've been talking about it, Rabbi Friedman was on the air I interviewed him on the air last week, and we talked a lot about the thing. And that is what resonated with me the most, and talking about elevating the relationship, the marriage, not just looking about my needs, your needs, but what does the us need? You can maintain your individuality, but there is still a third. There is the us. And I think we need to focus more on that rather than what we need, and always searching for this fulfillment from the outside. So that would be the last thing I will say. Well, thank you for having me here, by the way.
From a spiritual perspective, there are two kinds of love. I mean, there are five, actually, languages, but there are two kinds of love described in the Song of Songs. There's love like water, ava kamayim, and there's love like fire, ava kerish be'esh. The difference is love between siblings, parents and children. The love that you're born into is like water. It's calm, it flows steady, consistent. The love like fire is between husband and wife, because the distance that needs to be overcome between a man and a woman, between a husband and a wife, makes the fire, the intensity of the love, which makes it into a stormy and unpredictable emotion, which is the appropriate emotion for husband and wife. If between husband and wife the love becomes like water, then it's become like soup. Yeah. It's not good. It's not healthy. Unless you've been married for 60 years. After you're married for 60 years, the love does become like water. And it becomes like pleasure instead of love. The love turns into pleasure. But the reason that the Torah gives us all the laws of modesty, of when to be intimate, how to be intimate, only in the dark, only when you're in a good mood, only when you're on the same page, only after the wife has gone to the mikveh. The reason for this is because the rhythm of the emotion has to be matched by the body and by the physical schedule of the intimacy. Between husband and wife, a fiery love means it's up and down. It rises and it falls. It's constantly in motion. It cannot stay the same. I mean, you mentioned something about unconditional love is a fixation. It's not an emotion anymore. To support the kind of love that husband and wife should have, which is not like water, the physical schedule of intimacy matches together, separate, up, down, back and forth. That's the healthy, natural rhythm for a husband-wife relationship. So the wisdom and the beauty of the mikveh law, of the 2-week separation and 2-week reunion, it's not just a spiritual, holy, or religious thing. It is a natural rhythm that supports the natural emotion, that supports the soul of the marriage, so that the body, the spirit, and the soul are all in harmony. So if you want to improve or resuscitate or even resurrect your intimate life from whatever has happened to it, follow the rhythm, follow the pattern, and it will come back. Because what's normal and natural can only be interrupted, it can't be destroyed.
Thank you, Dr. Laurie. Thank you, Rabbi Friedman, and thank you all for coming. As I'm sure you all agree, it was a very enlightening and inspiring evening. Thank you.